What did Mendel's law of segregation state? A. Genes are inherited independently from each other. B. Genes are inherited together in a linked manner. C. Alleles segregate randomly during gamete formation. D. Alleles always stay together during inheritance. The correct answer is C. Mendel's law of segregation states that alleles segregate randomly during gamete formation. Which of the following is an example of incomplete dominance? A. Crossing a red flower with a white flower results in pink flowers. B. Crossing a red flower with a white flower results in red and white flowers. C. Crossing a red flower with a white flower results in red flowers. D. Crossing a red flower with a white flower results in white flowers. The correct answer is A. Incomplete dominance is when the heterozygous phenotype is an intermediate blend of the two homozygous phenotypes, like crossing a red flower with a white flower to get pink flowers. What is the ratio resulting from a dihybrid cross between two heterozygous individuals, assuming independent assortment? A. 9:3:3:1. B. 1:2:1. C. 3:1. D. 1:1:1:1. The correct answer is A. In a dihybrid cross with independent assortment, the resulting ratio is 9:3:3:1 for the four possible phenotypes. What is codominance? A. One allele is dominant over the other and masks its effects. B. Both alleles contribute to the phenotype, in a way that both are fully and separately expressed. C. Neither allele is expressed in the phenotype. D. Both alleles are recessive and do not affect the phenotype. The correct answer is B. Codominance is when both alleles contribute to the phenotype, in a way that both are fully and separately expressed. Which genetic concept explains why some traits seem to be inherited together more often than expected? A. Genetic recombination. B. Genetic mutation. C. Gene linkage. D. Epistasis. The correct answer is C. Gene linkage can explain why certain traits appear to be inherited together more often than predicted by independent assortment. In a monohybrid cross between two heterozygous individuals, what is the phenotypic ratio of the offspring according to Mendel's law of dominance? A. 3:1. B. 1:2:1. C. 9:3. 3:1. D. 1:1. 1:1. The correct answer is A. The phenotypic ratio of offspring in a monohybrid cross between two heterozygous individuals, according to Mendel's law of dominance, is 3:1. What is the term used to describe the situation where both alleles at a gene locus are fully expressed in the heterozygote? A. Incomplete dominance. B. Codominance. C. Epistasis. D. Linkage. The correct answer is B. Less than break time equals 1s greater than. Codominance means both alleles at a gene location are fully expressed in heterozygotes. Neither allele is dominant or recessive. In a dihybrid cross phenotype, how do genes segregate if they're on the same chromosome? A. Follow Mendel's law of segregation. B. Undergo independent assortment. C. Follow Mendel's law of dominance. D. Exhibit linkage. The correct answer is D. Genes located close together on a chromosome may not separate independently. This is called linkage, and it's an exception to Mendel's law of independent assortment. How is gene linkage related to genetic mapping of chromosomes? A. Genes that are far apart on the same chromosome are more likely to be inherited together. B. Genes that are close together on the same chromosome are more likely to be inherited together. C. Genes located on different chromosomes always segregate independently. D. linkage has no impact on genetic mapping. The correct answer is B. Gene linkage refers to genes located close together on a chromosome. These genes tend to be inherited together. This affects how accurately we can map genes on chromosomes. What is the term used to describe the modification of one gene's effect on the expression of another gene? A. Incomplete dominance. B. Codominance. C. Epistasis. D. Linkage. The correct answer is C. Epistasis is the term for when one gene changes how another gene is expressed, affecting the traits we see. How does incomplete dominance differ from codominance in terms of allele expression? A. Incomplete dominance exhibits both alleles fully expressed, while codominance only shows the dominant allele. B. Codominance exhibits both alleles fully expressed, while incomplete dominance only shows the recessive allele. C. Incomplete dominance results in a blend of the two alleles, while codominance shows both alleles independently. D. Incomplete dominance and codominance have the same expression pattern for alleles. The correct answer is C. Incomplete dominance results in a blend of the two alleles. Codominance shows both alleles expressed independently, without blending. Which of the following genetic disorders demonstrates codominance in the inheritance pattern? A. Sickle cell anemia. B. Abo blood type system. C. Cystic fibrosis. D. Huntington's disease. The correct answer is B. The Abo blood type system demonstrates codominance, where both the A and B alleles are fully expressed in heterozygotes with blood type AB. What do you call the phenomenon where one gene masks the effect of another gene at a different locus? A. Independent assortment. B. Codominance. C. Complementation. D. Epistasis. The correct answer is D. Epistasis refers to a phenomenon where one gene can mask or modify the effect of another gene at a different location. This impacts how specific traits are expressed. How does Mendel's law of independent assortment differ from gene linkage in how traits are inherited? A. Mendel's law says traits on the same chromosome are inherited together, but gene linkage describes traits on different chromosomes. B. Mendel's law says traits are inherited independently, while gene linkage shows traits inherited together. C. Mendel's law describes independent segregation, while gene linkage means traits interact. D. Mendel's law explains gene expression, while gene linkage predicts allele combinations. The correct answer is B. Mendel's law of independent assortment predicts that traits will segregate independently during gamete formation. Gene linkage indicates that traits located closely on the same chromosome are more likely to be inherited together. Which term defines the situation where two different alleles for a trait are both expressed in the heterozygous individual, without blending of phenotypes? A. Epistasis. B. Codominance. C. Incomplete dominance. D. Linkage. The correct answer is B. Codominance describes when two different alleles for a trait are both expressed in a heterozygous individual, without any blending of phenotypes. In genetics, what phenomenon occurs when one gene masks the effect of another gene at a different locus? A. Epistasis. B. Incomplete dominance. C. Codominance. D. Gene linkage. The correct answer is A. Epistasis is a phenomenon where one gene affects the expression of another gene at a different locus, masking its effect. What genetic concept causes certain traits to be inherited together more often than expected by independent assortment? A. Complete dominance. B. Gene linkage. C. Epistasis. D. Codominance. The correct answer is B. Gene linkage can cause genes located on the same chromosome to be inherited together more often than if they were independently assorted. In a dihybrid cross, where do genes segregate if they're located on the same chromosome? A. Independently. B. Separately. C. Randomly. D. Together. The correct answer is D. Genes located on the same chromosome tend to be inherited together, rather than independently, due to gene linkage. What term describes when both alleles at a gene locus are fully expressed in a heterozygote? A. Codominance. B. Incomplete dominance. C. Epistasis. D. Complete dominance. The correct answer is A. Codominance describes a situation where both alleles at a gene locus are fully expressed in the heterozygote. Which genetic concept describes how one gene changes the effect of another? A. Gene linkage. B. Epistasis. C. Codominance. D. Incomplete dominance. The correct answer is B. Epistasis is the genetic concept explaining how one gene can modify another's effect on expression. How does gene linkage relate to the concept of genetic mapping of chromosomes? A. Gene linkage is used to determine the distance between genes on a chromosome. B. Gene linkage involves the interaction of genes with environmental factors. C. Gene linkage is unrelated to genetic mapping. D. Gene linkage refers to the physical connection between genes and chromosomes. The correct answer is A. Gene linkage is used in genetic mapping to determine the relative distance between genes on a chromosome based on how often they're inherited together. How does incomplete dominance differ from codominance in terms of allele expression? A. In incomplete dominance, one allele is not completely dominant, while in codominance, both alleles show up equally. B. Incomplete dominance blends the traits, while codominance shows both traits distinctly. C. Incomplete dominance gives a 3:1 ratio, while codominance gives a 1:2:1 ratio. D. Incomplete dominance follows Mendel's law of segregation, but codominance doesn't quite fit Mendel's law of dominance. The correct answer is B. Incomplete dominance results in a blending of phenotypes. Codominance shows the distinct expression of both alleles without blending. How does Mendel's law of independent assortment differ from gene linkage in inheriting genetic traits? A. Mendel's law says genes on different chromosomes separate independently, unlike gene linkage where genes are on the same chromosome. B. Mendel's law applies only to dihybrid crosses, while gene linkage applies to monohybrid crosses. C. Mendel's law involves codominance, but gene linkage involves incomplete dominance. D. Mendel's law predicts a 9:3, 3:1 ratio, but gene linkage gives non-Mendelian ratios. The correct answer is A. Mendel's law of independent assortment describes how genes on different chromosomes segregate independently during meiosis. Gene linkage pertains to genes located on the same chromosome that tend to be inherited together. What is the genetic phenomenon where one gene affects the expression of another gene? A. Epistasis. B. Codominance. C. Incomplete dominance. D. Linkage. The correct answer is A. Epistasis is a genetic phenomenon where one gene affects the expression of another gene, masking or modifying its effect. In a dihybrid cross with genes on the same chromosome, what's the phenomenon when genes don't assort independently during meiosis? A. Linkage. B. Codominance. C. Epistasis. D. Incomplete dominance. The correct answer is A. Linkage is the phenomenon where genes don't assort independently during meiosis because they're located close together on the same chromosome. What is the term for when two different alleles for a trait are both fully expressed in a heterozygous individual, without the phenotypes blending? A. Codominance. B. Incomplete dominance. C. Epistasis. D. Linkage. The correct answer is A. Codominance describes when two different alleles for a trait are both fully expressed in a heterozygous individual, without blending of phenotypes. Which genetic concept causes certain traits to be inherited together more often than expected by independent assortment? A. Gene linkage. B. Epistasis. C. Codominance. D. Incomplete dominance. The correct answer is A. Gene linkage means some traits are inherited together more often than expected. This is because the genes controlling those traits are close together on the same chromosome. How is gene linkage related to genetic chromosome mapping? A. Gene linkage helps identify genes on the same chromosome for mapping. B. Gene linkage prevents accurate genetic mapping. C. Gene linkage is unrelated to genetic mapping. D. Gene linkage simplifies the genetic mapping process. The correct answer is A. Gene linkage is related to genetic mapping. It helps identify genes on the same chromosome, which is crucial for mapping. In a dihybrid cross with genes on the same chromosome, how do the genes segregate during meiosis? A. They tend to be inherited together due to linkage. B. They assort independently due to gene linkage. C. They show incomplete dominance. D. They exhibit codominance. The correct answer is A. In a dihybrid cross with genes located on the same chromosome, the genes tend to be inherited together due to gene linkage, resulting in non-independent assortment. What genetic concept describes how one gene changes the effect of another? A. Epistasis. B. Incomplete dominance. C. Codominance. D. Gene linkage. The correct answer is A. Epistasis is a genetic concept. It describes how one gene can change the way another gene is expressed. This can involve masking or modifying the other gene's effect. What's the main difference between codominance and incomplete dominance? A. In codominance, one allele completely masks the other, while in incomplete dominance, neither allele is dominant. B. In codominance, both alleles are expressed fully, while in incomplete dominance, a blend of both alleles is expressed. C. In codominance, one allele is partially dominant over the other, while in incomplete dominance, both alleles fully express. D. In codominance, alleles are inherited together more often than predicted by independent assortment, while in incomplete dominance, traits segregate independently in offspring. The correct answer is B. Codominance involves both alleles being fully expressed without blending. Incomplete dominance results in a mix, or blend, of both alleles. What term describes the situation where genes are located on the same chromosome and don't assort independently during meiosis? A. Incomplete dominance. B. Codominance. C. Gene linkage. D. Epistasis. The correct answer is C. Gene linkage refers to the phenomenon where genes located close together on the same chromosome are inherited together more often than predicted by Mendel's laws. What genetic concept modifies one gene's expression using a gene at a different location? A. Incomplete dominance. B. Codominance. C. Epistasis. D. Gene linkage. The correct answer is C. Epistasis is when one gene affects the expression of another gene at a different locus. What term describes when two different alleles for a trait are both fully expressed in a heterozygote, without blending? A. Incomplete dominance. B. Codominance. C. Genetic mapping. D. Epistasis. The correct answer is B. Codominance occurs when both alleles at a gene locus are fully expressed in the heterozygote without blending. How does gene linkage relate to the concept of genetic mapping of chromosomes? A. Genes close together on a chromosome are inherited together more often than expected. B. Gene mapping uses incomplete dominance. C. Gene linkage means alleles for different genes segregate independently. D. Genes far apart on a chromosome always assort independently. The correct answer is A. Gene linkage refers to the tendency of genes located close together on a chromosome to be inherited together more often, aiding in genetic mapping of chromosomes. In genetics, what genetic concept causes certain traits to be inherited together more often than predicted by independent assortment? A. Codominance. B. Epistasis. C. Gene linkage. D. Incomplete dominance. The correct answer is C. Gene linkage is the genetic concept where genes located close together on the same chromosome are inherited together more often than predicted by independent assortment. Which genetic disorder demonstrates codominance in its inheritance pattern? A. Sickle cell anemia. B. Huntington's disease. C. Familial hypercholesterolemia. D. ABO blood type. The correct answer is D. Less than break time equals 1s greater than. ABO blood type inheritance shows codominance. Both A and B alleles are fully expressed in heterozygotes, resulting in type AB blood. A dihybrid cross where the genes are located on the same chromosome and don't assort independently during meiosis is an example of A. Epistasis. B. Codominance. C. Gene linkage. D. Incomplete dominance. The correct answer is C. Gene linkage occurs when genes are located close together on the same chromosome and do not follow the law of independent assortment. What genetic concept describes how one gene changes the effect of another? A. Genetic mapping. B. Codominance. C. Epistasis. D. Allelic expression. The correct answer is C. Epistasis is a genetic concept where one gene affects the expression of another gene, modifying its phenotypic outcome. In genetics, what phenomenon happens when one gene affects another gene's expression at a different location? A. Codominance. B. Incomplete dominance. C. Epistasis. D. Gene linkage. The correct answer is C. Epistasis is the phenomenon where one gene affects the expression of another gene at a different locus, interrupting its phenotypic expression. How is gene linkage related to the concept of genetic mapping of chromosomes? A. They are independent events in genetics. B. Gene mapping can only occur with codominant genes. C. Gene linkage can affect the results of genetic mapping. D. Gene linkage only occurs in epistasis. The correct answer is C. Gene linkage, where genes are located near each other on the same chromosome, can impact the interpretation of genetic mapping results. Which genetic concept causes certain traits to be inherited together more often than expected by independent assortment? A. Epistasis. B. Incomplete dominance. C. Codominance. D. Gene linkage. The correct answer is D. Gene linkage can cause certain traits to be inherited together more often than expected by independent assortment, due to the physical proximity of the genes on the same chromosome. Which genetic disorder demonstrates codominance in its inheritance pattern? A. Sickle cell anemia. B. Hemophilia. C. Albinism. D. ABO blood group system. The correct answer is D. The ABO blood group system demonstrates codominance, where both the A and B alleles are expressed in the AB blood type phenotype. What genetic concept describes when two different alleles for a trait are both fully expressed in a heterozygous individual, without blended phenotypes? A. Epistasis. B. Incomplete dominance. C. Codominance. D. Gene linkage. The correct answer is C. Less than break time equals 1s greater than. Codominance is a genetic concept where two different alleles for a trait are both fully expressed in a heterozygous individual, without one being dominant over the other. In genetics, what genetic concept causes certain traits to be inherited together more often than expected by independent assortment? A. Gene mapping. B. Inheritance patterns. C. Epistasis. D. Gene linkage. The correct answer is D. Gene linkage can lead to certain traits being inherited together more frequently than expected, because they're physically close together on the same chromosome. How does gene linkage relate to genetic chromosome mapping? A. Gene linkage always results in inaccurate genetic mapping. B. Gene linkage can influence the accuracy of genetic mapping. C. Gene linkage has no impact on genetic mapping. D. Genetic mapping disregards gene linkage. The correct answer is B. Gene linkage affects how linked genes are inherited. This can skew the results of genetic mapping studies, potentially making the distance between genes on a chromosome seem greater than it actually is. In genetics, how does the concept of gene linkage differ from Mendel's law of independent assortment? A. Gene linkage means genes on the same chromosome are inherited together, unlike independent assortment where alleles are randomly distributed. B. Gene linkage shows how one gene affects another at a different spot, while independent assortment describes random allele assortment during gamete formation. C. Gene linkage is about chromosome mapping, while independent assortment affects phenotype ratios in dihybrid crosses. D. Gene linkage describes two different alleles showing up in heterozygotes without blending, unlike independent assortment which explains how a gene modifies another's effect. A. None of the above. The correct answer is A. Gene linkage involves genes located on the same chromosome and tend to be inherited together, while independent assortment refers to the random distribution of alleles into gametes. What genetic concept leads to certain traits being inherited together more often than expected by independent assortment? A. Codominance. B. Gene linkage. C. Epistasis. D. Incomplete dominance. The correct answer is B. Gene linkage is a genetic concept that can cause certain traits to be inherited together more often than predicted by independent assortment. In genetics, what term describes when two different alleles for a trait are both fully expressed in a heterozygous individual, without any blending of phenotypes? A. Codominance. B. Incomplete dominance. C. Gene linkage. D. Epistasis. The correct answer is A. Codominance describes when two different alleles for a trait are both fully expressed in a heterozygous individual, without blending of phenotypes. How does the concept of gene linkage relate to the genetic mapping of chromosomes? A. Gene linkage explains how one gene affects another's expression, helping map chromosomes. B. Genes on the same chromosome are linked, allowing us to map their physical locations. C. Gene linkage changes the ratios we see in crosses, aiding chromosome mapping. D. Gene linkage doesn't cause incomplete dominance. That's incorrect. The correct answer is B. Gene linkage involves genes located on the same chromosome. These linked genes can be used to map their physical locations on chromosomes. What genetic disorder demonstrates codominance in its inheritance pattern? A. Hemophilia. B. Sickle cell anemia. C. Abo blood group system. D. Cystic fibrosis. The correct answer is C. The Abo blood group system demonstrates codominance in its inheritance pattern. What term describes the situation where genes are located on the same chromosome and don't assort independently during meiosis? A. Codominance. B. Incomplete dominance. C. Epistasis. D. Gene linkage. The correct answer is D. Gene linkage describes genes located on the same chromosome, which don't assort independently during meiosis. What genetic concept describes how one gene changes the effect of another? A. Gene linkage. B. Incomplete dominance. C. Epistasis. D. Codominance. The correct answer is C. Epistasis is the genetic concept describing how one gene's effect modifies another gene's expression. In genetics, what phenomenon occurs when one gene affects the expression of another gene at a different locus? A. Codominance. B. Gene linkage. C. Epistasis. D. Incomplete dominance. The correct answer is C. Epistasis is the phenomenon where one gene affects the expression of another gene at a different locus. How is gene linkage related to the concept of genetic mapping chromosomes? A. Gene linkage helps determine offspring phenotypic ratios in genetic crosses. B. Gene linkage assists in understanding how one gene affects another's expression at the same locus. C. Gene linkage can map gene locations on chromosomes. D. Gene linkage explains two different alleles fully expressing in heterozygotes. The correct answer is C. Gene linkage involves genes located on the same chromosome. These genes can be used to map their physical locations on chromosomes.